research that is focused on women, led by women, and made to empower women. It is so rare, and it is exactly the vision here in Saudi Arabia. Dr. Aseel Alammar, the director of Sarah Al-Sudairy Center for Women's Studies, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the Sarah Al-Sudairy Center for Women's Studies was established fairly recently in 2022, I believe. What is the intended impact that you wish to have through your work and your research?
Thank you for having me today. So the center is a think tank for women's studies. It was established through royal decree to be a think tank for women's studies, as well as preserve and showcase Saudi women's history in their contribution throughout history. So we focus on two main things: conducting studies pertaining to women that ultimately informs policy that affects women, as well as preserve and document their contributions throughout history and showcase them. So on the first front, we make sure that we conduct research that is evidence-based policy enhancement. So we want to support policy by providing evidence-based recommendation. On the preservation front, we are aiming to not only preserve and document women's history, but also showcasing it. The first thing we're doing is the Saudi Women's Museum, and we're establishing it this upcoming year. And now we're working on making sure to collect enough historical assets that showcase that heritage and that history, because it's not enough to develop policy that helps women. We want to make sure that future generations have enough women to look up to. We want them to be part of that museum and part of that culture where we can show them how much of their ancestors have contributed to where they are now. We want them to be proud about being an extension of that history.
Now, I love that you're saying it's actionable policy recommendations, because this is ultimately designed to boost capabilities and to boost women in the work field. But there's often a gap between research and the actual field. So how do you ensure that women are able to thrive, that these recommendations truly make an impact on ground?
Okay, so we're not doing that impact on our own, right? This is all collaborative from every other institute that also wants to look at women's contribution in the workforce. What we do is to ensure that there's always been a gap, you're right, between academia and actionable recommendations. What we do, since it's a think tank, we support studies that look at specifically at recommendations that can eventually support policy that would enhance her contribution in the workforce, because this is all in line with the country's direction to not only have women be part of the workforce. Vision 2030 didn't just put a target to reach. There is a clear commitment from the leadership to not only have her be part of that workforce, but also thrive in that workforce. So we see initiatives, human capital development investments that help with her education and training and mentorship to make sure that she's a impactful part of that workforce.
And as they go through all of this, you obviously get to collect a ton of data and accordingly make these policy changes, or these policy recommendations, I should say. But what changes need to be implemented and adopted to allow more women to actually benefit from the work you're doing?
So a lot of the policies, like we discussed yesterday, the country has always been committed to systematic improvements and rights and privileges for all citizens. If we look at those rights and privileges that are specifically for females, since that implementation happened, we've made strides and progress when it comes to female participation. So we've already crossed so many barriers as is. There's, of course, always room for improvement. What needs to change is not something we're going to change up at the moment, but by virtue of establishing this center, there's a clear understanding of the need to keep these policies, the effects of these policies sustainable, to keep studying, measuring, and making sure that we have the right data that supports these initiatives, making sure where tweaks and changes need to be made and what else can be enhanced.
Yeah, the transformation definitely takes time, and it definitely changes as we go along because life changes. It's not something that's static, but policy can only go so far. What do you think are other measures we need to take to support the policies to ensure that we really unlock that potential?
Yeah, so usually when policy changes, behavior follows, not the other way around. when you change a policy for people, you need to make sure they're on board with that policy change. So changing that behavior, like you just mentioned, it takes time. We need enough experience and confidence in those fields to thrive and go forward. So that's where we need to allow some room to see those effects and see those changes.
Perfect. I want to thank you so much for the amazing work you do and all the insights you've shared with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.